At dawn, they dug a grave that wasn't meant to hold a body. The dirt was wet, heavy, and red like it remembered blood. The men digging didn't speak. They had been told not to. Silence was safer in this place. Silence lived longer. The grave was marked with a name that belonged to a man who was still breathing. Elijah Boone. According to the plantation ledger, Elijah Boone had died 3 days earlier. Fever. Buried at sunrise. Case closed. But somewhere in the Alabama woods, Elijah Boone was alive and walking back toward the place that had already killed him once. This is not a story about escape. It's a story about return. Because Elijah Boone ran once and vanished so completely that even the hounds lost his scent. No chains, no body, just an empty trail swallowed by swamp and trees. And then, 7 years later, he came back, not as a ghost, not as a legend, but as something far more dangerous. Someone who remembered everything. In the early 1800s, Alabama plantations were more than fields and whip marks. They were closed systems, self-contained worlds, churches that preached obedience, schools that taught forgetting, records that lied. And when someone escaped, the system didn't just lose labor. It lost control. This plantation, called Briar Hollow by the people who owned it, had a secret older than its buildings. A secret that required certain people to never leave. Children born there were meant to stay. Families were meant to fracture. Names were meant to disappear. Elijah Boone was not supposed to remember his name, but memory clung to him like rot. And when he returned, it wasn't freedom he brought with him. It was exposure. Because some places don't fear rebellion. They fear witnesses. Elijah was born into Briar Hollow before it had a name. His mother called it the quiet place. Not because it was peaceful, but because sound traveled wrong there. Screams faded fast. Prayers went unanswered. Even birds avoided certain trees. From the time Elijah could walk, he was taught rules that were never written down. Never speak after dark. Never look into the north field. Never ask what happened to the children who didn't grow tall. The white church on the hill watched everything. Sundays were mandatory. The sermons were slow, calm, and empty. Obedience was called holiness. Silence was called grace. But Elijah noticed things. He noticed how the preacher never used names when talking about sin. How the plantation records listed births that didn't match the children living there. How sometimes entire families vanished between seasons, and no one was allowed to mourn. At night, his mother whispered stories that weren't in the Bible. She spoke of an older hunger in the land, of owners who believed suffering made soil richer, of men who thought fear could be harvested like cotton. When Elijah was 12, his younger sister was taken to the big house to help. She never came back. No body, no explanation, just a blank space where her name had been. That was when Elijah learned the final rule. Survival here meant becoming forgettable. And Elijah refused. Elijah ran the night the dogs were fed early. He noticed small things others missed. The way the overseer's voice shook. The way lanterns were spaced wider than usual. Something was coming. Something planned. He didn't say goodbye. Goodbyes got people killed. He slipped into the swamp barefoot, following paths no one used because they were said to loop forever. The mud swallowed sound. The insects screamed loud enough to cover his breathing. The dogs were released at dawn. They followed his trail for 2 miles, then stopped. Not confused, not tired, refusing. The handlers swore the animals whimpered, pulled back, and lay down like they'd reached a grave they didn't want to cross. The plantation marked Elijah as dead that same day. But Elijah kept moving. North, then west, then nowhere at all. For years, he lived without a name. Worked under borrowed faces. Learned how men hid violence behind scripture. Learned how towns protected themselves by pretending they didn't know. And most importantly, he learned that Briar Hollow wasn't the only place like it. It was just one of the quiet ones. But every night, he dreamed of the ledger. The book that decided who existed. And who didn't. Freedom didn't bring peace. It brought clarity. Elijah learned that his mother had died 2 winters after he escaped. Worked to exhaustion. Buried without marker. His father vanished soon after, listed as sold, but no destination recorded. His remaining siblings were still there, still inside the quiet place. Elijah understood then what escape had cost him, and what staying had cost them. He spent months planning his return, not as a runaway, but as a shadow, someone the system wouldn't recognize until it was too late. He learned to read records, to copy handwriting, to change numbers without being noticed. Because Briar Hollow didn't run on whips alone. It ran on paper, and paper could be rewritten. When Elijah crossed back into Alabama, he did so at dusk. The land recognized him. The trees were the same, the silence heavier, and the grave with his name on it waited, still empty. Elijah Boone did not return as Elijah Boone. The plantation believed he was already buried. That belief was his shield. He came back as a clerk sent from Montgomery, carrying letters with wax seals no one dared question. He wore borrowed shoes, clean but worn, and spoke softly. Soft voices were trusted. Loud ones were watched. No one looks closely at a man who belongs to the paperwork. Inside the main house, the air smelled like ink and old wood. Ledgers lined the walls like ribs. Every life on the plantation was reduced to marks on paper: births, punishments, transfers, deaths. Elijah found his name quickly. Boone Elijah, deceased. A single line. No ceremony. No truth. But when he turned the page, he saw something worse. Names crossed out. Ages altered. Entire families condensed into numbers. Children listed as relocated, with no record of where. This wasn't bookkeeping. It was erasure. Elijah realized then that escape was never meant to be permanent. The system allowed people to disappear, so long as they disappeared cleanly. No witnesses. No mess. The church handled the souls. The ledger handled the bodies. And together, they kept Briar Hollow quiet. The white church on the hill was older than the plantation house. Older than the roads. Older than the graves. Inside, the pews were polished smooth by generations of bowed heads. The pulpit stood high, built so the preacher never had to look anyone in the eye. Elijah attended Sunday service like a stranger. The sermon spoke of obedience as love, of suffering as purification, of silence as survival. But behind the altar, Elijah noticed a locked room. No one entered it. No one acknowledged it. After service, he followed the preacher inside. The room smelled wrong. Not like dust or age, but like something sealed too long. There were shelves, boxes, records not meant for the main ledger, baptismal logs with missing names, deaths recorded without dates, children listed without parents, and symbols Elijah had never seen before, etched into wood, drawn into margins, circles broken by lines, crosses bent slightly off-center. This wasn't Christianity. This was control wearing religion like a mask. The church didn't save souls. It sorted them. At night, Elijah walked the edges of the plantation. There were places even the overseers avoided. Fields where crops grew uneven. Cabins left standing but empty. He spoke quietly to the elders. They told him stories in pieces. About children taken to learn. About singing heard underground. About a room beneath the church where footsteps echoed wrong. One woman told Elijah she had given birth 6 times. Only 3 names remained. The others had been chosen. Chosen for what? No one knew. Or no one dared say. Elijah connected the records to the land. To the patterns. To the disappearances spaced exactly 7 years apart. This was not random cruelty. It was ritualized, planned, repeated, and it fed on forgetting. Elijah didn't free anyone at first. That would have been noticed. Instead, he changed ink. He altered ages so children became too old to be moved. Changed ownership lines so families could not be legally separated. Delayed transfers. Lost records. Paper cuts deeper than knives when you know where to slice. Slowly, the system began to choke on its own lies. Overseers argued. Owners questioned missing profits. The church records no longer matched the plantation books. Something was wrong. Something unseen. And Elijah knew he didn't have much time. Because Briar Hollow could forgive rebellion. But it would never forgive exposure. Briar Hollow reacted before the people did. Crops began to fail in neat, unnatural lines. Livestock refused certain paths. Dogs stopped barking at night and stared into the trees instead. The elders whispered that the land was unsettled. Elijah understood what that really meant. The system was aware it was being disturbed. Paper lies create real consequences. When ledgers stopped aligning with sermons, when numbers no longer balanced suffering, the plantation lost its rhythm. Control depends on repetition. Elijah had broken the pattern. That was when the church rang its bell on a Wednesday. It had never done that before. Everyone came. The preacher spoke of infestation, of corruption, of something dead walking where it should not. Elijah stood in the back and listened as his own death was described like a warning. Not everyone had forgotten Elijah Boone. An old overseer recognized his eyes. Eyes don't age the way faces do. The man followed him one night, slow and careful. When he spoke Elijah's name, it wasn't anger in his voice. It was fear. You were supposed to stay gone, the overseer said. Elijah didn't deny it. The man confessed things he'd never told another living soul. About children buried without markers. About payments from churches in other counties. About men who believed suffering created order. They said it kept the land calm, he whispered. That it fed something. The overseer was found dead the next morning. Official cause, fall from the church steps. Unofficial truth, he talked. Elijah went underground the night after the overseer died. The locked room led to a staircase. Below it was a chamber carved by hand. No windows. No altar. Just marks on the walls. Tallies. Names scratched out. Symbols repeated again and again. This was where children had been brought. Not killed. Prepared. Elijah found small shoes. Bibles without covers. A ledger written in a different hand. Older, tighter, afraid. It listed offerings. Not to God. To silence. Briar Hollow wasn't hiding sin. It was maintaining an agreement. Elijah found his youngest brother alive. Hidden. Scarred. Still breathing. The reunion was quiet. Crying would have alerted the system. They planned fast. This wouldn't be escape. It would be collapse. Elijah knew the truth now. You don't destroy a place like Briar Hollow by running. You destroy it by making it remember. Elijah waited for a storm. Storms erased footprints. Storms gave cover. Storms made noise that sounded like judgment. When the rain finally came, he moved. The main house was empty. The owners had gone south for the season, trusting paper and routine to keep order in their absence. Elijah lit only one lamp. Enough to see, not enough to warn. He opened every ledger. Not just Briar Hollows, but copies sent to churches, courts, and trading houses. And he rewrote them. Names restored. Births corrected. Deaths erased. Missing children returned to the page like ghosts demanding to be seen. He didn't invent anything. He told the truth. Truth is the most dangerous thing you can put into a system built on silence. By morning, Briar Hollow officially held more people than it could legally own. Families that were never related suddenly were. Transfers contradicted sermons. Deaths overlapped with living witnesses. The plantation became a crime scene on paper. The church bell rang at dawn. Then again. Then again. It didn't stop. People gathered, afraid. Bells were meant to call, not accuse. The preacher stood pale, holding a ledger that no longer obeyed him. His voice cracked as he read names aloud. Names that weren't supposed to exist. Mother screamed. Father stepped forward. The bell rang until the rope burned the preacher's hands. This was not rebellion. This was recognition. The quiet place had learned how loud it really was. The overseers tried to restore order. They failed. Men don't fight well when lies fall apart. Whips mean nothing when paper says you are already free. Guns mean less when witnesses are everywhere. Families moved together for the first time in generations. People stood where they had been told never to stand. The land didn't resist. The crops stilled. The dogs went silent. Whatever Briar Hollow had been feeding, it was starving now. Elijah did not leave with the first group. He stayed until the last name was spoken, until every child was claimed, until the church doors were nailed shut, not from the outside, but within. When Elijah finally walked away, it was with his family beside him. No running, no hiding, just leaving. Behind them, Briar Hollow collapsed into memory. Not burned, not destroyed, just exposed. And that was worse. Briar Hollow did not make the newspapers the way massacres did. There were no headlines screaming outrage. No trials that named names. Instead, there were quiet phrases. Administrative failure. Clerical inconsistencies. Orderly relocation. The plantation was dissolved within the year. Its owners sold the land at a loss. The church was reassigned. Records were sealed under county authority. Nothing to see. Nothing to remember. Because America, even then, understood something dangerous about truth. If one system like Briar Hollow existed, others had to exist too. And that was unacceptable. Elijah Boone vanished a second time. But this time, he took everyone with him. Census records from the next decade show entire families appearing suddenly in neighboring states, listed as free, literate, and strangely well-documented. Too clean. Too intentional. It's believed Elijah taught others how to read the system the way he did. How to protect memory. How to write truth so carefully it couldn't be erased without effort. He never spoke publicly, never testified, never claimed credit. That's how he survived. The most effective witnesses know when to disappear. Briar Hollow does not exist on modern maps. The land was swallowed by forest again. The church collapsed in on itself. The foundation of the main house still sits, half buried, like a rib cage. Locals avoid the area, not because it's haunted, but because sometimes, when the ground floods, old names rise to the surface, scratched into wood, pressed into stone, written where ink once refused to stay. The land remembers even when people won't. Briar Hollow wasn't an evil place. It was a system perfected, a machine that ran on silence, obedience, and forgetting. And those machines don't need plantations anymore. They wear different clothes now, use different words, build different churches, but they still fear the same thing. Someone who comes back, someone who remembers, someone who tells the truth so clearly that the lie collapses under its own weight. Elijah Boone escaped twice. The first time, he saved himself. The second time, he freed his family. And the third time, when his story survived it all, he freed the past. Some graves are dug to hold bodies. Others are dug to bury names. And sometimes, the dead refuse to stay quiet.